Welcome to part 6 of the Electric Bastionland deep dive. This is a very high energy intro. I didn't normally go for this kind of energy, but I'm going to go with it. I've been going for a very casual, laid back thing so far. But one thing I am, if I'm consistent in anything, it's that I'm inconsistent, and I'm going to stick with a high energy tonight because I feel like it's been quite a long day. I've actually been outside for the first time in a long time, for a prolonged amount of time. I had to sit in the sun outside on grass, and it's not my natural habitat, so my body is in shock. I'm so used to being inside these last few months, so I think my body is taking a bit of a toll today, but I'm going to be powering through it with extra energy. So forgive me if I go too far, but we're gonna get straight onto the book because that's what you're here for. And here we are. We're finally there after all this talk about Bastion. We are in the Bastion chapter. Fun fact, these big sort of title headers, I obviously checked the book for typos. I'm sure there are a few that made it through. I'm sure that some of the typos didn't get spotted. But the only thing that I was certain about was I was terrified that there was going to be a typo in one of these giant title things, you know, like when you miss something because it's so obvious. And I think when someone got hold of a book, they tweeted me or contacted me on the Discord saying, "Oh, hey, it's funny that it says Electric Bastionland down the spine." And I ran to get my copy and checked that it didn't say Electric Bastionland, because when I type it, half the time I type it, it just seems to go Bastion, and it just rolls off the hand better than Bastion sometimes. So I'm glad that this doesn't have a typo saying Bastionland. What it does have, let's hide me just so we can fully enjoy this spread. One of my favourites here. I think if any of the pieces capture the Where's Wally style that I asked Alec to try and go for, I think this is the one. Part of me kind of wishes that the crowd scene just like carried on going up to like 2/3 up the page. But I guess Alec is only human, and you wouldn't get all this awesome architecture and all these signs. And I can't recommend enough reading the signs, because like I said, there's so many that I didn't read first time round. But yeah, I love this, the sort of the verticality of it. It really captures Bastion really well. So yeah, this is going to be another Let's Praise Alec episode, I'm afraid, but that's one of my favourite pieces. I think there's so many little NPCs in here, so that, I mean, I'm going to hide myself again because the baboon or mandrill or whatever this guy is, he makes an appearance later in the book, snipped out. I liked him that much on the very, very last page. I also like, can I zoom in here? Is it gonna? Yeah. Let's do my highlights. Top 5. Oh, no. It does not like this. Here we go. Yeah, top 5 NPCs on here. No, it's gone wrong. I can't do it. Right, we'll come back to that. We'll do that later. I'll get the full high res version of this, and we'll do top 5. But I think it's got to be between like full diving suit guy. I like this person with straight hair and tiny glasses. I don't know how else to describe this person here. Listen Baby in the driving the sort of tuk-tuk. I'm assuming this is the bonehead from the Experiment Survivor, who with the skull. Light bulb head, square head. Where's fish head? Yeah, fish tank head. Yeah, I could stay on this one all day. Good stuff. Makes it easy because I needn't have bothered writing the setting. I could have just got Alec to do all this art. So, understanding Bastion. So the layout of these sections of the world, for the sections of the world, I wanted each of the 3 areas of Bastionland to have a few spreads. I didn't want to just go nuts and have like 50 pages describing everything in Bastion. I wanted it to be a really concise, distilled essence of what I see I'll stick to Bastion first, but what I saw Bastion as being, let's say, and something that had lots of character, but was still very open for you to create your own stuff. And to do that, I sort of limited myself to each spread had to have a purpose. So it's not just here's me talking about Bastion for a page. The purpose of each spread is right there. So this is what you read when you get the book. You're going to run a game tomorrow, and you want to know what is Bastion. You read this, and it tells you. It's everything that you need to know. And there are a few concessions here to having like bits of kind of, I said that I didn't like too much canon in my setting. So, and here it does get a little bit touchy. Some bits of it are kind of like telling you hard truths about the city. And it's a balancing act. I wanted to have some hard truths in there. So things like the philosophies, the fact that there are alienists, there are machinists, and there are humanists. But, you know, you can also assume that there are a million other philosophies that aren't listed here. And the way that councils work and so on. Oh, we've got spam. I knew I shouldn't get excited about spam. But let's delete this person. I shouldn't be making like a really big thing here. Boom, done. I'm sure the professionals just like do this in their sleep, but that's I think my first spam bot we've had on here. I think we maybe had one last week, but it's immediately distracted me from the actual work, so I will be sure not to do this every time I get a spam bot. So I was talking about the canonical elements of the setting here. So I did want to have some things in here, like the fact that electricity is new, and I wanted these truths to sort of open up more opportunities rather than close things down. So I wanted them to be things that you might not have thought of. So I've told you it's a big city. So I don't need to tell you, like, yes, there are lots of different types of shops. And yes, people live in big apartment buildings and things like that. Like, you could probably just get that from the fact that it's a city. But what you might not have thought about is things like the living city. So even though it's an urban setting, it's civilization, there is nature everywhere. And that was a big part of the brief in the art. That was something we discovered as we were doing the artwork, was more animals, more plants. Bastion is alive with more than just humans. And also the idea of boroughs breaks it up nicely, and it kind of gets across the idea that this is a very fractured city. And councils, so you're not necessarily dealing with, there might be like a mayor of a borough, but there's always councils involved, and it just makes things nice and complicated. So I'm jumping ahead because we've got, at the very start of the first page here on Bastion, we've got the 3 principles. And this is really where the whole 3 bullet point thing came from. And I've done my research this week. I've traced it back to, let's get my browser up and hope. Here we go. So, cast your mind back to Sunday the 4th of January 2015. Who knows what was happening back then, but 5 years ago, I wrote this blog post called The Key Principles of the Odd World. So by this point, Into the Odd had been out for Electric Bastionland, Into the Odd was November, I think, 2014. So this is right after Into the Odd was released. So this wasn't in Into the Odd. This is something I sort of thought of straight afterwards. And I wanted to have 3 bullet points that describe, if you can distill the essence of a part of the setting down to 3 points, I think you've done pretty well. So 5 years ago, the 3 principles of Bastion were: it has everything, nobody knows who's in charge, and everything is complicated. And they kind of stayed in this way, they kind of stayed in this shape for a good while. I changed the order. I had everything is complicated, and then it has everything changed to everything is here. And then we had nobody knows who's in charge. And for a long time, they were just what I used. They were my sort of, my gospel for Bastion. But as you can see here, they slightly changed for Electric Bastionland. So we had everything is here. And that is really just there's a reason that one's first as well, because it's just like, if you're in doubt, just remember everything is here. And that's a good thing and it's a bad thing. You know, if you want to find a place for something that you've thought of, you can find a place for it in Bastion. Everything is here. But everything is here and everything is in your way. Everything is complicated. It's just a good thing to remember if things are seeming a little bit boring and you've created your city. Think, how can I make this more complicated? How can I get people entangled up with each other? How can I make this location I've created, how can I make it just more complicated and annoying and difficult to deal with? And it's tricky because, you know, all through the game I talk about things being simple and being clear with information, but I wanted you to be doing that because the world is complicated. So you don't need to make the game complicated. You don't need to drown your players in different options because the world is complicated enough. And then the last one which changed, so previously the last principle, the third one, was nobody knows who's in charge, which I kind of liked, and it kind of gets across this kind of slightly inept feel of Bastion that Bastion can have, like the whole bureaucracy, and there's not some empress of Bastion. It's not going to happen. It's all about people bickering and jockeying for power. But I wanted that to be, that can be a bit of a problem because there are times when you need to know who's in charge. Like, even just if you take it to its extreme and say nobody knows who's in charge, it just gets a bit too chaotic. So instead, everything is shared. Does some of the same, where you can never fully own Bastion, and in fact you can't really fully own a little bit of Bastion either. You're always going to be sharing it with someone, whether it's a council that has influence over it, whether it's someone else that has shared ownership. You know, you share your debt. Everything is shared, but it still means you can have a bit of a hierarchy and you can have a little bit more structure in place. And in fact, it's more structure really, and it's less chaos. It's a bit more bureaucracy, if that makes sense. So yeah, they're the three principles that I landed on, and I think they alone tell you a good amount about the city. And if you're writing for Bastion or you're running Bastion, they are pretty solid things to come back to and remember. And yeah, you can sort of extend it here. So I wanted to explain the whole shared element a little bit more. So everything you find and everything you want is tied to some person in some way, getting back to the focus on characters and non-player characters. Everyone is here. People, mockeries, aliens, machines, they're all here. And yeah, nobody knows who's in charge. So I did keep that in there, but it's not a sort of big principle on its own anymore. It's just kind of slipped in there. The triple rule is useful. I think I've spoken about that before. I'm going to get onto the spark table because I did say we're going to roll on every spark table. So spark tables can be used for everything, basically. It could be a character, a place, an event. So I think because we're in Bastion, let's say we're going to make a character. So let's get 2d20. I can see we've got some questions piling up. I will be getting to it. So let's roll. 2d20. 2d20. Yeah, okay. I've got to actually select. Yeah, there we go. 18 and 14. So, burnt university. Okay. So, the whole point of the spark table is it's meant to be used for multiple purposes. So, obviously, a burnt university, you could take that very literally. And you could say it's a university that burnt down and your person is a professor from that university and they lost their job as a professor because the university burnt down. Maybe they were maybe they were doing an experiment that burnt it down. But I think you can go further than that. So you could have something was burnt in a university. So maybe there's like a sort of book burning censorship thing going on. University, you could not take that 100% literally. And you could take it as students, burnt out students. So maybe it's a student that's just like trying to study for 3 different degrees at once because they accidentally registered for too many courses. And yeah, that it's what I'm trying to do here is just get words that fit in Bastion. So it might not look like much on its own, but like pastry, I like that pastry is the first one. It's like it's like the most weirdly specific one on here. But I think a pastry is a very modern thing. I know that's completely baseless, but like sort of patisseries makes me think of Bastion for some reason. And yeah, Spark 2, you got some weirdly specific things like lizard. I went through a phase of thinking like, should there be like an iconic animal for Bastion? And I went against it, and I'm glad that I did, because it's just too specific. I wanted it to be like every animal there. And lizard for a while was like, I thought about having the idea that there are, whereas most cities have pigeons and rats, Bastion had like lizards and parrots. But they're still there. Again, everything is here. You can have lizards and parrots be your vermin, but they're not the only type of vermin. Each borough has its own unique flavour of vermin. And I live in Manchester in the UK, where the symbol is the bee, as the kind of worker bee, like the industrial background of the city. And I always liked, since I moved here years and years ago, sort of seeing the little symbol hidden around places in town. It's less hidden now. It's become a much bigger phenomenon. It used to be a little Easter egg almost that you could just spot around the city, and now it's everywhere. But yeah, I'm glad that I didn't go ahead with that. And yeah, I think that's kind of this spread pretty much covered. I'm not going to go over every point, but yeah, that's sort of the philosophy behind this idea. I've got no idea what Alec was doing with this picture. Let me hide so you can see it. Person with roses coming out their head and a light bulb. I mean, I love it, but Alec, if you want to explain that would be now would be a good time. Right, let's do some questions, seeing as we are reaching that point. So Alec is with us tonight, obviously. He was listening to Breakbot. You make me feel like such an old man, Alec. Like we've discussed this, how Patrick was doing a read through of the book on Twitter, and he was basically like, yes, it's fascinating how Alex, you can see the sort of the influence of the young modern energy of this bright young artist Alec. It's as compared to the very grey pastry like elements that Chris brings to the party. So yeah, you make me feel very uncool already by not knowing who Breakbot are. When I was drawing the Tuk Tuk, and the Listen Baby chorus was getting me very upbeat. Okay, right. I will listen to your hip new musical artist and see if that fits with the picture. That's cool. So, Zvon Raider, would you consider putting out an Electric Bastionland playlist of music to get you into the EBL mindset or use during play? People have asked me about this before. I do listen to a lot of music, but it's weird in that there's not much specific music where I can think this really makes me think of Electric Bastionland, which is weird because I spent so long thinking about this setting and this game, but I can't think of many pieces of music where I'm like, oh yeah, I was listening to this when I was writing. Because when I'm writing, I like to have music on, but I almost don't hear it. I sort of black out while I'm focusing on writing stuff, and I quite like to just listen to familiar music that I can just kind of absorb. If I'm listening to like new music I've not heard before and I need to kind of pay attention, I find it just distracts me from what I'm doing. So I did listen to a lot of Joy Division while I was writing this, just because I do anyway, and also the industrial urban feel is kind of appropriate. Let me fix that. Yeah, I'll have a think if there's anything else that fits. Weirdly, even though it has a lot of flavour, I'm struggling. So I'd be really interested to see what other people think is music that fits the setting. That would be really interesting to me to see. Postmodern Jukebox, weirdly, are a guilty pleasure. I do like some of the stuff they do. That would certainly fit as like background music if you were running a Bastionland game. What would be a good resource for adventures scenarios to plug into an Electric Bastionland campaign or for a one-shot? So if you go on to bastionland.com, There are a number of little adventures on there. The Prison of the Worm Queen is the one I've designed basically to be an introductory adventure for Electric Bastionland, so I'd use that. The Trilemma one-page adventures, one-page dungeons, they're really good. If you search for Trilemma one-page dungeons, you'll find it. They're very short, obviously, one page, so you have to do a bit of work on them yourself, but I think they're a good core for the most part. Yeah, Dragon and Toast is the music for that I use on the introduction and the background of videos and so on. Yeah, Gary Newman. Yeah, I weirdly, I did listen to a lot. I had a playlist that was called something like early experimental electronic music. So I thought, well, that would be perfect because this is the dawn of the electric age. I'm canonically telling you that there are like early synthesizers on here. A lot of that stuff's quite tough listening when you're trying to write. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in that kind of early electronic synthesizer based music. But some of it can be quite, what's the word? It doesn't slip into the background. Some of it's quite forward, and I don't know if it's just the way that I work, but I find that when I'm writing, it just I kind of just need music to wash over me and keep me going through the day. Okay, cool. Let's hop back to it. So I said that each spread needs to serve a purpose. So this is what you're reading before you run the game. I'll come back, but we've got Mapping Bastion, Stocking Bastion, Conducting Bastion with some example tables. It pains me that I had to do like a continued page for these. But yeah, a continued page on Conducting Bastion, and then that's it. So each spread serves a purpose, and it's just 4 spreads, 8 pages. And you might think 8 pages isn't very much for the most important city that's ever existed, but like I said, the whole book is the setting. These are just like now you've absorbed some of it, let's talk about how to actually use it, how to run it. So, mapping. One thing that I wish I'd put in here, I hope that people would take it as this isn't like the way that you have to do it. If you don't want to use route mapping for Bastion, you're not doing it wrong. This is just my suggested method for doing it. I wanted to have it there as a procedure because it wasn't enough for me to just say, okay, here's some ideas about how to make a cool city. And I go off, draw a map, and put the stuff on the map, and off you go. Because I think for some people, drawing the map is the difficult part. And I didn't want people to think, well, I can't do that because I can't draw a map. Because anyone can just draw a little red dot and a line and a red dot and a line and a red dot. So I thought about doing it like a rail map. I'm sure I've seen this somewhere before. I'm not going to claim that I invented using this for role-playing games, but it also ties into, when we spoke about typefaces, this is the London Underground typeface, but I just love the tube map, and I think it's a very interesting, something very captivating, right? It just grabs me. And I remember being a weird kid, and like I had a copy of the tube map that I would look at before I'd ever been to London when I was a little kid, and just kind of working out routes between places and trying to think about what the different places could be and finding names of places that I'd heard of, like, oh, Marble Arch, I've heard of that place. So I think something about the tube map just stuck in my head. It's a lot less fun when you're actually trying to navigate the tube as an adult, but something about it stuck in my head, so I thought that's a very early 20th century design. Let's lean into that as the main way of mapping Bastion. And yeah, what you end up with is I quite liked it because it means you don't have to worry about what's on every street and what's in every alleyway, and you're not trying to design a map of a whole city because that's impossible. Like, you could sit and do it and spend hours and days and weeks, but really what you need to know is where are the interesting bits and how do I get from one interesting bit to the next interesting bit, and what's stopping me. So I had to focus on routes, complications between them, and I wanted to make it clear that, yeah, this is a route map, but you can go between 2 points that aren't connected. Like, there's always a way between 2 landmarks, but there's a reason why it's not a route. Anyone that's been to a city will know that. It's like, if I need to get from A to B, there might be a really straight route that isn't a very sensible way to go. Maybe you have to run over a railway line or something, but in an RPG, you'd have it in there as you're kind of going off-road. And again, we're getting back to this idea that the setting serves the game. So this works well for a game, so the setting reflects that by saying no one's got a good map of all of Bastion. There's no one big map of Bastion that you can buy. So you have to look at signposts and you have to ask people for directions. It's another opportunity to introduce colourful characters to your game. If the players ask you, okay, how do we get to this place? Just say, I don't know, there's people everywhere. You're going to go and ask someone? You know, there's this group of people rummaging through some bins on this side of the street, and on the other side there's a man walking a pack of about 15 dogs, and they're kind of pulling him away, and he's trying desperately to control them. And there's a smoky bar that you could go into and try and ask someone for directions in there. Yeah, it serves the game by getting them to talk to weirdos. And then stocking is kind of the same. I wanted it to be a procedure, and I wanted to explain. So this stocking section is kind of similar between. In fact, both these pages, this spread, was based on the same structure for both Bastion, Deep Country, and the Underground. In that, I wanted to say there's treasure everywhere. So, what is treasure like in Bastion? Because I've already spoken about treasure in general. But what does that mean for treasure in Bastion? So yeah, it could be lost in a dangerous borough, it could be owned by someone powerful, or it could be left in plain sight. Patrons, specialists, mercenaries, shops, enterprise opportunities. I'm only talking about things that are going to come up in the game. I'm not telling you about who runs the electric company. I'm not telling you about the history of Bastion when it was founded. I'm just telling you about things that you're going to get asked about when you run the game. People are going to want to know, well, can I hire some mercenaries? People are going to want to say, well, can I go to a shop and buy a new gun with my money? And the thing that I like about the shops is that there's no such thing as a general store. If you want some armor, you've got to find the armor shop. You can't just go to the shop like you're clicking a menu in a computer RPG and saying, right, I'm buying chain armor. No, you have to go to the armor shop and talk to the weirdo that runs it. And yeah, it's an armor shop, but it also sells perfume, and he's trying to upsell you to like perfume to go that matches every armor. And he's always trying to get you an alternate payment option. So he's like, yeah, you can pay half now, and then you can pay me 10% every month for the next 6 months. And it's a tricky line to walk that could get really annoying. Like there's good annoying where you're just like, this city, it's driving me mad. And there's bad annoying where you're just like, I'm getting fed up with this game. Sometimes I just want to buy the armor and get the new thing. So it's a tricky line to walk. And Enterprise was a much bigger thing in Into the Yard. There was a whole system. Well, I say system. It was like a paragraph for like running a business, because that felt like something that I should put in there, because a big thing in sort of the OSR at the time was about domain level play and how it was underserved. And I thought, well, I can put that in. I can have that you don't get a castle because that doesn't make much sense, but you might start a business and you could recruit detachments of troops to your business, and you could lead a big expedition. And it just turned into it. One of my things that I kept in the document was keep the main thing the main thing, and it's always going to be about trying to find treasure. It's always about going into a dangerous place. That's the core of the game. You can divert from that, but if you want to do that, that's kind of on you. Like, that's not the focus of what's in the book. So enterprise opportunities here are very kind of sidelined. So you can just invest and it will grow each month, but there's always a threat and there's always a risky opportunity you can do. So you can just leave it, and it's probably going to be, money's going to fritter away. Or if you want to make the most of that money, you've got to get involved with the business, but you'll have to deal with threats and you have to exploit opportunities. It's not just about rolling a die and hoping that you get, I rolled a 5. That means my investment grew 15% this month, because that's a different game, and it's not the game that happens at my table, and it's not really the game I want this to be. Okay, let's question it up. Soundtrack for Brazil. So many people tell me, when people talk about what they think influenced Electric Bastionland, they think I'm much more literate than I am, because they talk about I'm now even struggling to remember what's it called? Perdido Street Station. That whole series of books, which I've obviously not read because I'm struggling to remember. I read a bit of The City in the City, which I think is in the same series, but I read like a chapter and then forgot to go back to the book. And people talk about Brazil. So Esker says the soundtrack. Are we back? The famous crash happened again. Yeah. I do not have an explanation for the crash. I'm hoping that it didn't cut out too much of an unfortunate timing. It's weird that it is a very similar time to where it crashed last week. Yeah, we're still alive. Okay. So I was talking about how I've never seen Brazil and I've not read books and I'm illiterate, and I just came up with all these ideas just by osmosis of people reading these things and watching these things and probably just passing the ideas to me. Questions. Yeah, let me get back to the questions. Concrete music. You know what? That's interesting, potentially. That's something I would need to explore more, but I could see the logic there. Rithuan asks, are you going to draw a map? I thought about doing this as a part of the deep dive, but I would like to do that. If you search on YouTube, there's a very badly shot example of me doing this like years ago for Deep Country. If you just search for like Electric Bastionland on YouTube, it's not on this channel, it's on another YouTube channel. There's a very bad old video of me doing it to showcase how the sort of route mapping works, but I will do a proper fancier one. I mean, I say fancy, it's going to be as fancy as this is. You know, I've got a notepad up already, but I will do a proper video of that. I didn't want to do it in the deep dive because I wanted to give it a bit more time. But yeah, I will definitely do an example of creating a borough in Bastion. Any guidelines for the ratio of threats / non-threats in the city of Bastion? Asks Dreaming Dragon Slayer. Yes. I think everything in Bastion especially, so we'll talk about the other bits of the world when we get to it, but everything in Bastion should kind of be a little bit of a threat, but also mostly not a threat in most circumstances, if that makes sense. So you're not going to have many times when you're just like randomly attacked by a pack of dogs. It can happen. I think that was in one of the playtest packages I did. You're not going to get like many straight up hostile encounters. You're much more likely to gradually annoy somebody so much that you've made an enemy of them and then they become a threat. I think there's not going to be like the equivalent of like bandits jumping out of alleyways to attack you. I mean, you can do that. Again, everything I say is just like, here's how I run the game. So I would make sure everything is a little bit threatening and everything has the potential to turn bad if you piss them off. So let's get back on it. So yeah, that's making a borough of Bastion done, and then conducting Bastion. So here you will see the dark influence of Powered by the Apocalypse a little bit in how this is written. I don't think it's deliberate, but I wanted to have, again, the idea that these spreads are kind of like GM screens, and you can just have it open on a spread and it's everything that you need for a situation. So when you're running Bastion, these two spreads, I know, yeah, I wish I could have got them on one. I probably could have if I tightened it all up, but I also didn't want to like crush it so there was no art or anything like that. So this is like your go-to point for like answers. So if they want to find a place, describe two options, put them in opposite directions and make them both complicated in their own way. So I said earlier about somebody wanting to buy armor. Well, there are 2 armor dealers in this borough. One of them, it's a traveling dealer, so you don't know where they are, but you'd have to ask around. One of them, they've got a big shop in the center of the borough, but it's very exclusive, so you'd have to get like a member's invite to get in there. Again, you can decide how often you want to do this and how deep you want to go into the idea that Bastion is an absolute pain in the arse to do anything. But it's a good go-to rule. Find a specialist. Let's say you're not looking to buy some armor. Let's say you want to get it repaired. Give them a second unrelated speciality. Give them a characteristic counter to their job and put them in a complicated situation involving another character. So if you ask me to imagine like a blacksmith, I'm imagining like a big, tough guy, big moustache. He's very gruff. Maybe he's a bit, withdrawn, hiding his feelings, and he's just like hammering away. Okay, well, yeah, you can come up with that stereotype yourself. But I like this juxtaposition. Give them something counter to their job. So I always think like being a blacksmith is obviously a very demanding job, very physically demanding. So maybe this person is actually incredibly lazy, and maybe they've channeled that laziness into finding techniques to repair armor that don't involve loads of hammering. Maybe they've enlisted the help of machines and mockeries. Give them a second unrelated speciality. So yeah, he's into armory, but give him something else that he's doing as well. Maybe he's making all this armor, but he's got all these machines helping him, and he's got like a model railway going around his workshop. So he's like obsessed with all these little models that he's got, and put them in a complicated situation involving another character. So yeah, you heard about them through another NPC that you know, and maybe they've got like a sort of maybe they're like ex partners, and they used to work together, and now it's all gone south, and but they're still sort of tied together legally in like some debt or something like that. Socializing, again, I forget I've written half of this stuff. If they just want to go out drinking, it's one of these horror stories that you hear. Well, some people it's a horror story. For some people, it's like a great game where they say, oh, the players wouldn't leave the bar. They just wanted to stay around and get drunk, and they were just like joking around in the bar, in the tavern, if you like. And if that's fun, then great. But I kind of want a bit more. I think that could be good in a campaign where you've got multiple games. But if it's a one shot and you kind of want to drive things forward, ask them what they want to get out of it, so you can kind of zoom out. So you can say, okay, cool. So you're getting drunk in the bar. What are you actually trying to do? Are you trying to make contact? Are you trying to do research? Are you just trying to let off some steam? And then give them a choice as to how to do that. So you still got this focus on choices. And yeah, ways to get to the underground, deep country, and living stars. So get to the living stars. This will be interesting as we move ahead with other things. So to get to living stars, you can get it via the underground. Ships must pass through mists that break reality. Somebody's always trying a new way to travel there. Oh, that's good to know. So we're not ruling out anything for getting to the living stars. There's new ways being discovered every day. And then encounters. So these, I reluctantly put these in because I fought it for a while, because I thought, no, I don't need to have encounters, because you can just flick to a random page in the failed careers and use that as your influence. And you don't need to have boroughs and electric terrors, because I've described the world. You can make up your own stuff, but it does help to just have some little sample content. I think some examples of what something might look like. So you remember when I said that you weren't just going to be attacked by a pack of dogs in Bastion? Well, one of the encounters here is a hyena pack, picking at carrion and chasing street urchins. But I would say the key thing here is they're not just out to attack you. They're like scavengers. They're hyenas I chose hyenas for a reason, because they are scavengers. And they're not just going to come and hunt you down and eat you. you would be able to distract them, or you might even be able to use them to your advantage. Giant Bagman, I've had him come up a number of times in games. I can't remember if I've just reused him or I rolled on his table. The idea of a bagman, I don't know whether this stereotype translates to the rest of the world, but in the UK there's kind of the idea of a van man. So a man that has a van, just doing odd jobs because he's got a big van that he can transport things around, like doing house moves and stuff. He's a man with a van. This is just a man with a bag, and that's his identity. So you might hire him to move something across the city. You might hire him to go and clear out rubbish from somewhere. He's just a man with a bag, singing a sad song. Yeah. So the encounters are just there to kind of give you a sense of the flavour of what an encounter might look like. The Electric Terrors. Most of these are, I think, from the blog in some form. I do like the puffer suit that can just inflate. And yeah, the Altabrella as well. So, I'm going to hide myself for this because I want you to be able to see these. So, these are a kind of a different take on the touchstones. No, sorry, these are the touchstones, but they're a different take on the spark table idea. So I had the spark table of just his 20, well, 40, I guess, random words that kind of fit within Bastion. But I wanted to make it a bit more structured and say these are things that people would care about. Frequent topics of conversation. So if you go to a bar and there's two people arguing about something, well, what are they arguing about? Let's find out. Let's do a D12 and a D4. And I did like a D12 and a D4 because sometimes you don't need this extra randomness sometimes you just want the general topic. And but here, yeah, so 10 and 1. 10, it's not a D10. Come on. Who wrote this thing? So let's do a mega roll just to get a really good result. So roll 5 for the topic and 2 for the specific topic. So academia and artifact vaults. So why are they arguing about artifact vaults? Why would people care so much about it? Because it's a topic of some debate in Bastion, apparently. These are things that people care about. And what I tried to do, I don't know whether this was necessarily successful, is between Bastion, Deep Country and the Underground, there's some sort of obvious reflections in there. Yeah, Kome has just told me that I switched to a D8. Come on. Yeah, I did select the right die. I did get it right. Let me have that, please. So these are kind of reflect. So if we look at Bastion, let's look at, say, the first and the last one. So the first point is industry and the last point is modernity. Now I didn't look at this in advance, so I might be completely wrong. But in Deep Country, the touchstones, we have there's kind of a parallel for each one. They don't match up by number. I thought I'd done this much more cleverly than I had, but yeah, instead of modernity, you have tradition, perhaps, or history, like the kind of opposites to modernity. Instead of industry, you could argue that like stagnation is kind of the opposite of industry. It's things breaking down instead of things building up. And even in the Underground, so is there an alternative? Is there a reflection of modernity here? I think cruelty was kind of seen as the sort of twist here. And then industry, maybe not. But there are definite mirrors here where I wanted to have each part of the setting kind of reflects the others. It's like a three-way mirror, if that makes sense. So yeah, I find these really useful. I think these, I've seen people talk about the spark tables, but I think these are my kind of go-to tables when I'm in Bastion, if I want to like inject a bit of flavour into something. And youth fashion and slang is always a fun one to get. Wild music. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that isn't explained. Oh, well, here we go. Favorite pastime. Where's it gone? Yeah, the unionization one is fun as well. There's some good stuff in there. Adapted creatures. There's a lot of meat on that bone. Adapted creatures. So how have creatures adapted to live in Bastion? And then I will be rolling on these two tables because these are possibly my two favourite tables in the game. They are extremely self-indulgent because they are borderline, I don't want to say useless, but they're so weirdly specific that I think it comes back around again and it's actually good. When I came up with them, I was like, oh, that's a joke. If I've got room at the back of the book, I'll do like I did in Into the Odd. There was the oddpendium at the back of the book where it was just a load of random tables, and it was things like, I eat the stuff, what happens? And you roll a die. But these were kind of going to go in the back, and then I thought, you know what, the fact that the two tables that I have for Bastion are cocktails and parlour games, that tells you something about the setting. So what cocktail are we going to do? This is what I should have done, is I should have like prepared this cocktail. I will, whatever cocktail I roll, I have a limited bar downstairs at the moment, but whatever cocktail I roll, I will do my best. You have my word to approximate it with what I have in the house at the start of next week's stream, and you can name the cocktail for me. How's that for interactivity? I'm not taking this one. I'm going to roll and roll and roll because this is the most important roll that we're going to do. So I'm standing back. 1 and 4. 1 is never a good one. Gin. I have gin. Gin and cherry wine. You know, that's actually kind of straightforward. I don't have any cherry wine. I have cherry liqueur. I have maraschino liqueur. Gin and maraschino liqueur is not a bad combination. It generally needs something sharp to balance it out, but if that's what I've got, then that's what I will be drinking at the start of next week's deep dive. I will be creating a cocktail based around gin and cherry liqueur because I don't have cherry wine. Maraschino liqueur, if you've not had it, is incredible. Is this just going to turn into the deep dive into my bar? It's a very, very, very funky liqueur that does taste like cherry, but it's made with like the whole cherry with the stones, so it's got a very almondy sort of flavour, and it's quite, I think it's like grappa based, so it's kind of got a kind of funky grapey element to it as well from the spirit, and it's not that sweet in terms of the flavour. It's a little bit bitter even, and it's a great thing to put a very small amount in cocktails. Fizding has made the mistake of asking me what is my favourite IRL cocktail. I could talk about this for a long time. I think the boring answer is a Negroni. Saying that, a Boulevardier probably more than a Negroni. So that's a sort of rye-based Negroni. I like a Sazerac. I like a Vieux Carré if I'm being fancy. Basically, I like cocktails that are mostly spirits, and I like ones that have something bitter in there, like Campari or Fernet Branca or anything like that. I don't mind lemon juice or lime juice, but I think I'm generally a straight spirits and liqueurs and vermouth kind of cocktail guy, really. The classic era of cocktails that this draws on. So gin and cherry wine. You know what? We'll do one more. And if it's more interesting, I might try and do that one as well. 16 and 2. Grass spirit. So when I put grass spirit, I think the intention there wasn't. I'm not sure that there's like bison grass infused vodka and things like that. That was kind of a nod to. I already had cane rum. But there's cachaça is like a sort of Brazilian rum-like product that's made from like sugarcane. but to me always tastes quite grassy. So that's basically me saying cachaça. I don't have any cachaça in the house, but I can see what I can do. And 12, anchovy sauce. Oof. Cachaça and anchovy sauce might be tricky. I will see if I can get hold of some cachaça. And if I can't, I will look for what I have on the bar that's the closest. And I will, for anchovy sauce, I have Worcestershire sauce. And I have anchovies. So tune in next week for me drinking one potentially very nice cocktail and one potentially very challenging cocktail. I'm not sure of the ethics on drinking during stream. Put some lawn clippings in your vodka. Yeah, thanks, Bernardosaurus. I'm already finding excuses to not mow the lawn because I can't be bothered. But yeah, I will try my best to produce these two cocktails. And next week, whoever comes up with the best name, I'm not taking names now, but next week when I'm drinking them, whoever tells me the best name for these two cocktails will be immortalised in my mind forever. Parlour games. I think these basically speak for themselves. 9 and 12. Cold Bullet. That's a very serious sounding parlour game. 8 and 6. Hot Bluff. I imagine that's one more from like student parties. 5 and 15. Blind Piggy. I think Blind Piggy wins for parlour game of the day. I will not be writing the rules for Blind Piggy for next week's stream. I think I've got my work cut out for me already with these. So yeah, that's Bastion. Now, I'm not going to start in Deep Country. I'll get some questions and then I might skip ahead a little bit if we've got a little bit of time. We're kind of towards the end of the stream now. I've been tending to round things off after about an hour. So if you've got any questions, throw them at me. See if you can keep me occupied for a little bit longer before we finish the stream. Let's have a look at the questions. So the first one I think I've got here. Svan Raider. I'm so sorry about these names, guys. What do you use for the PCs? What do you use for when the... What do you do when the PCs wish to return home, or where they sleep at least? Now, this is something that I so nearly put in the game because I like what I like about the setting in Bastionland is it kind of gives you a sense of place and not many a sense of like home, where Bastion is presumably your home. So presumably you do have somewhere where you live. And originally I did think about having it that you all shared ownership of either a flat or I think at some point I was even saying like a van, which would have been a very different kind of game. But at the moment, I'm kind of assuming that you live somewhere really bad because you've not got any money. So maybe you live in an apartment that is also something else is the kind of the easy way to go. Maybe you all share it together. Maybe you're just in hostels because there will be, in Bastion, there's always a free option for this sort of thing. So maybe you're living in council supported accommodation. But I would ask them where they live, but make sure it doesn't prove to be somewhere useful. Chamay said, Bagman, thought he just had a bag over his head. So maybe he does have a bag over his head. Maybe that's like their uniform. So you see a guy with a bag on his head carrying a big sack. You know that he's like a bagman for hire. Yeah, squatters. Sky Full of Dust suggests squatters as an alternative to them having a place to live. Maybe they're squatting somewhere. Does jazz exist in Bastion? Come on. What is the first principle of Bastion? Everything is here. But to answer that in a more helpful way, let me jump back in for a second. So to answer that in a more helpful way, if you look under modernity, modern things exist, but in an old-fashioned style. So it's up to you whether you would consider jazz to be a modern thing. I think it is literally in the sense that it's at the start of what we call the modern era, I guess. But I would say yes, there is jazz, but one of the other sections here, it says Electric Bastion. If something can be made electric, somebody is doing it, and the old exists alongside the new. So yes, there are people playing jazz, but there are also people playing electro jazz on like electronic trumpets and stuff. So yeah, canonically, jazz does exist in Bastion, and so does every other style of music. But if it's modern, in the sense that it could be on modern radio today, then it's probably an old-fashioned version of it, much like the postmodern jukebox we spoke about. Thorin says it would violate stream ethics for me to drink on stream. Is this true? I said it's a joke, but do I really need to like not be drinking alcohol when I'm on Twitch? Is this a thing? I should not be admitting that I didn't read the full Twitch terms and conditions. I know that I'm not allowed to perform karaoke. That was one thing that I remember seeing. So that's a relief for everybody. No, writing the rules for Blind Piggy. Yeah, Thorin, thank you. So I will not be writing the rules for Blind Piggy. You can relax. So Thorin also says, how do you go about tipping the players off about new treasures after their first expedition? So if they've already paid off some of their debt, I would just ask them what their plan is. So say they've found enough treasure that paid off like £5,000 of their £10,000 debt. I would just say, okay, what's the plan now? And if they say we don't have a plan, then I would send the debt holder after them. And when the debt holder pursues them, maybe they can recommend something, and they can say, look, you owe us £5,000. There's no advantage in us just killing you, but there is a job you can do. You can go and find this treasure that's been tipped off to exist somewhere horrible. So I'm quite upfront about it. I'm just kind of like, this is the game. Here's your objective. Go. Skyful of Dust asks, do I have a favourite NPC from one of my games? I don't know why this made me laugh so much, but as you might tell from the way that I'm answering this question and the way that I talk about Bastion, I kind of just wing it a lot of the time, and I will start speaking perhaps before I've decided how that sentence is going to end, and that's how it goes for my role-playing games as well that I run. I tend to just roll with it and add ideas as I go. And I was running a game that was set in a borough. I can't even remember what like the main conflict was in this borough, but the players went into this pub and they were trying to find like the landlord of the pub was a contact they had to find. And there were there was 2 old men and a dog sat at a pub table, and one man was like pouring beer into his hand and holding it out to his dog, who was lapping it up, and the other man just had a jar of like English mustard, or Bastionese mustard, I guess, and he was just with his finger drinking his beer and just eating this mustard out of a jar. And I don't know where that came from, but I described it, and then I just started laughing for about 5 minutes, because I think anybody that's worked in a proper old man pub, I don't know whether this is especially in the UK, but you have your regulars in the pub, and they are always characters, these regulars, for better or worse. The guy that always insists on having a certain stool at the bar, the one that always insists on having a certain glass from behind. They are characters, and I can say that I never worked in a pub where I had a man eating mustard out of a jar, but something about that and sort of the way that the dog was being treated as a member of the group resonated with me. Yeah, I just like silly jokes by NPCs a lot of the times. I don't have like many deep NPCs that go through character arcs, and that they reach the climax of their arc, and I was moved to tears by the fact that this memorable NPC, that doesn't tend to happen in my games. I'm just I describe stupid things and it makes me laugh. Corgi Fam, do you generally get PCs to Deep Country via public transport or the underground? Or do you just hard frame them as being there already? If you're running a game, if it's a one-shot, and the place where your one-shot is happening is in Deep Country, I would either start them in Deep Country already and say, look, so you've decided to go to Deep Country to pursue this job, to find this treasure. And I'd start them off like on the train into Deep Country or something, so that it's clear they're leaving Bastion. They've come from Bastion, but I would start them on the road to Deep Country. Otherwise, you risk just having them stay in Bastion. And you might want to run with that, but if you really, really want to just do a one-shot based in Deep Country, start them there. Or give them, like, at most, a little introduction where they've already agreed they're going. And perhaps, yeah, there was one that I ran a few times where they were heading out into Deep Country, into massive country to find some giants. And they started in this kind of the building that belonged to their employer, and he was like, right, you've got 10 minutes before your train leaves. If you want to do anything, do it now. So they had a little bit of time to prepare, to ask around, but they were within 10 minutes they were going to be on the train to Deep Country. No, we've had that one. Dog in a Pond. What are your thoughts on the Soggy Pudding fan base? I think out of all of the let's do this. Out of all of the options on the parlor games, I will confess, obviously that the innuendo levels are high. I think out of what I'm trying to find, like, yeah, Soggy Pudding is high up there in terms of the sort of the silly names. Slippery, I think Slippery is perhaps better than Soggy. Blind is weirdly I'm not even going to say the word I was thinking. It's weirdly weird. Slippery is good. Squeaky. Sticky, but again, Sticky is a bit obvious. I'm going to go for Slippery. Slippery Piggy would be strong. Slippery Slipper. Now, you might think that I did that on purpose, but I think that's the first time I've seen that there is both Slippery and Slipper, but Slippery Slipper is going to be up there. Quiz. Quiz is good. Slippery Quiz, I think, is going to be my call. Slippery Quiz. So I'm assuming it's something that has both a grappling element. Well, the grapple's already here. Slippery, like, suggests a kind of trying to catch someone that's been greased up, and Quiz suggests that you're also getting some trivia in there as well. So that's my shout. I'm going to say the Soggy Pudding fan base needs to move over to Slippery Quiz. Lord Percy, what has been your inspiration in terms of books, movies, games to design Electric Bastionland? Again, people have asked me for like an Appendix N type thing where I do like a list of books or music. And like I said, I'm really bad at reading books. I'm really bad at finishing novels. So, and when I think about films, I'm like, there's not many films that leap out at me at like where I've watched it and I've thought that's the exact mood I want to create. In terms of just the weird, it's a bit of a tangent, but a film that I think really captures what I think a D&D game or this sort of game is kind of best represented by, weirdly, is I've always said Evil Dead, because it's kind of the balance of comedy and like madcap schemes to sort of try and survive. Big Trouble in Little China might seem like a weird choice because it's not really, doesn't really match tonally with Electric Bastionland, but just this idea that there's a lot more going on behind the scenes and that there's layers to everything. And I'm not going to say that you should watch Big Trouble in Little China to be inspired enough to run Electric Bastionland, but it's just an example of the things that inspire me aren't always the things that you would think from looking at the game. It's more about the sort of the mood and the kind of not so much the specifics of the details, but just like the tone of adventure and getting into trouble, and characters that are kind of, there's an element of humor to them, and maybe they're a little bit inept, and maybe the way that they win the day seems bizarre and doesn't seem to match with what you'd expect out of a normal narrative, but that kind of slightly wacky tone. In terms of games, if we're talking other role-playing games, Into the Odd was kind of like the game I wanted basic D&D to be, and I'm sure that many games have been created in that kind of that kind of idea. I take a lot more inspiration from games that frustrate me than games that I quite like. I kind of take a lot of inspiration from games where they don't match my expectations. And if I hear about a game being very simple and quick, and then I'll get into it and I'm like, well, this isn't quick at all. We've been slogging away in this combat for the last 20 minutes and it's kind of boring and I'm just whiffing and missing. Or you'll hear about a game having lots of weird character choices and like weird things can happen to your character, but then they're actually very unlikely to happen. So, for instance, the failed careers and the fact that you start with such weird and wacky equipment is much more inspired by games where I've started with a very boring character and I've been like, oh great, so I'm a fighter with chainmail and a sword. Great, cool. I'm as much inspired by things that I don't necessarily like about games as much as things that I do like, if that makes any sense at all. BioShock, I never really played BioShock. I'm familiar with like the look of it, and there's it certainly shares a look in places. From was BioShock? Yeah, BioShock is kind of like a spiritual successor to System Shock, isn't it? It's like some of the same team. I played a lot of System Shock 2 back in the day. And yeah, you know, it fits the kind of exploration, survival, exploring a weird environment. But BioShock, I can't claim to know enough about, to be honest. Weirdly, like I say, for this one, I was playing a lot when I was tidying it up at the end and putting it was more than just putting the finishing touches. I was like, I was getting the book ready for release and doing the final layout, editing last few pages of content. I was playing a lot of Breath of the Wild, and I think what that game does really well, which really inspired me, is it's not afraid to do things differently, and it must be extra difficult to do that when you've got a big franchise where there's lots of expectations. But it did things, and it went back to a focus. So let me put my thoughts in order before I start talking. So Into the Odd took the ODD from OD&D, and I wanted it to be what could have happened after OD&D. So to draw on some of that very early RPG feel, where lots of it is left open to interpretation, and there's things are quite quick and deadly, and you don't have reams and reams of skills and feats and stuff to draw on. So it was kind of drawing on the original idea of what OD&D could have been. And Breath of the Wild, I believe, is drawing on the original inspiration for Legend of Zelda, which I think Shigeru Miyamoto said was from exploring like the woods when he was a little kid, like around his house. So you think of Zelda as like these sort of epic games where it's all about like fighting big boss monsters and solving puzzles, but a lot of the feel he wanted to create was the feel of exploring a forest. And I think Breath of the Wild is the first one in a long time that's actually achieved that, where you're just like, you see a forest and you think, oh, I'm going to go and explore, and you might go in there and you might just press around in there finding some fruit, or like trying to chase after a deer. Like, it's not going to be necessarily a big traumatic dungeon experience. And that kind of philosophy is quite inspiring to me, where it's like, you don't have to have all the extra baggage that's been attached to a game just because all the other games have it. So you don't need to have advancement in the traditional sense. You don't need to have skills. You don't need to have attacks that can miss. All these things that I got rid of for Into the Odd and Electric Bastionland were kind of like quite significant diversions from a sort of classic RPG. And games that sort of do that and aren't afraid to make those choices really do sort of inspire me. So I think with that ramble of an answer, we are about at the end of the stream. So thank you everyone for coming. Next week I will be doing I'll be drinking apparently a gin and cherry brandy based liqueur. Am I allowed, do I have to just... So spirit and modifier, for those who aren't familiar with cocktails, so generally I think the rule should be that the spirit is the main chunk of the drink, and then the modifier is a lesser amount, which is a relief when I'm dealing with Worcestershire sauce. So am I allowed to use like other ingredients? I'm going to say that I can use one other ingredient as like a balancing factor, but the main body of the drink has to be the spirit, and the main flavour has to be from the modifier, and then the additional thing, I'm thinking I'll need like either a bit of sweetness or a bit of acidity or something to round out these drinks. So I will be drinking 1d4 minus 4 other ingredients. No, I'm just going to do one ingredient, one extra ingredient for balance, not to drown it out, and I will try and do a garnish for each one as well. Yeah, you can have 3 like bullet points, and I will be sharing the recipes. So next week I will be talking about Deep Country and drinking some disgusting drinks. Well, one nice, one disgusting. Fizding, you've made the mistake of bringing up egg whites. My birthday was a few weeks ago, and I was given... I like using egg whites in cocktails, especially in like sour style cocktails where the lemon juice, and when you shake it up with the egg white, you kind of get like a kind of frothy meringue almost style thing. I received like some... it's like a little... It comes in a little bottle with a pipette, and you sort of drop in a few drops, and it has the same effect as egg white, where it froths it up. I dread to think what's in it. It's some kind of emulsifier. Anyway, this isn't the Bastionland Cocktail Podcast. Maybe next week I will do some live mixing up here of the cocktails, and we will probably talk a little bit about the game as well. But until then, thank you for watching, and see you next week.